Have you ever wondered if enough people believing in something could actually make it real? It's a question that feels like it's straight out of science fiction. But today, we're going to dive into how this powerful idea of collective thought literally shaping reality shows up in some very real, and let's be honest, very strange places.
And that's really the core question for everything we're about to talk about. Can a group of people, just by focusing their shared belief on one single idea, actually bring something new into existence?
We're going to start in the world of the occult, looking at some wild experiments that were designed to literally create paranormal entities, basically from thin air.
Then, we're going to switch gears completely and jump into the political arena. We'll see how an almost identical process is used to construct these really complex, alternative stories about major world events.
And finally, we're going to land somewhere you probably wouldn't expect: modern science. We're going to explore how this same principle of collective focus is actually being used to push the boundaries of research itself.
Okay, so let's dive right into our first case study. This one comes to us straight from the world of parapsychology and, well, magic.
So the key idea here is something they call an egregore. The easiest way to think about it is like a thought that's been given form. It's an entity that just doesn't exist on its own until, that is, a group of people collectively pour enough mental and emotional energy into it to basically will it into existence.
Now check this out. This quote is from a totally fascinating experiment that happened on a TV show back in the 70s. A group of people just invented a ghost from scratch, gave him a name, a whole backstory, the works. But here's where it gets weird. Their creation started doing things on its own, revealing details that none of them had made up. As the source says, it behaved just like a real ghost.
And according to the people who do this stuff, there's kind of like a three-step recipe. First, you build a really detailed identity for your entity. Then, a whole group has to focus intense collective energy on it. And the final step? Well, if the focus is strong enough, the entity actually manifests, and sometimes even breaks free from its creator's control.
This can apparently even happen by accident. Take Walter Gibson, the guy who created the pulp hero The Shadow. He spent years and years writing about this character in his home in Greenwich Village. Long after he moved out, people started reporting seeing a shadowy figure that perfectly matched the Shadow's description. The theory is that he poured so much energy into his creation that he literally left behind a thought form, an astral construct, that's still just playing out its part.
Okay, so let's take that same idea of constructing a reality from focused thought and see how it applies in the completely different world of politics.
All right, now for politics. You probably remember all the talk about the Democratic National Committee's emails that were released back during the 2016 election. Now, the official story was that it was a Russian hack, but a whole alternative narrative was constructed around a totally different question. What if it wasn't an external hack at all, but an internal leak?
And this distinction is absolutely crucial. The leak theory says it was an inside job. Somebody physically on-site downloaded the data. The hack theory, on the other hand, says it was an outside job, a remote break-in over the internet. These aren't just two theories, they're two fundamentally different realities.
So believers in that leak theory, they point to sources just like this one as foundational proof. This anonymous post flat out states that the server wasn't hacked from the outside, but that the data was downloaded internally. This becomes a core belief, a building block for the whole narrative. And here is where it gets really interesting. Because the source material itself uses our key word explicitly. It doesn't just say the official story is wrong. It claims the entire narrative of Russian hacking and the Mueller investigation was deliberately constructed. I mean, that's the language of building a reality, plain and simple.
And this alternative reality, it isn't built on just one claim. It's actually woven together from all these different threads. You've got testimony from whistleblowers, analyses of data forensics, and these anonymous online posts called Q-drops. By connecting all those dots, followers build this really cohesive story, a political egregor, you might even say.
So we've gone from the paranormal to the political, and now we're going to turn to our final example, science. I know, it might seem like a huge leap, but the core principle of harnessing collective focus to build something totally new, well, it shows up here too.
This brings us to the world of citizen science, which asks a really simple but kind of profound question. Can you get valid, useful scientific data by basically crowdsourcing the work to thousands of regular people online?
And, it's a real balancing act. On the one hand, You get access to this huge pool of free labor, it gets the public engaged, and it frees up the experts to do more complex stuff. But on the flip side, there are some real pitfalls. You got to constantly check the data quality, and there's a risk it could devalue the work of professional scientists.
But the potential here is just huge. When it's done right, this isn't just about collecting data. It's about focusing the collective energy of the public to build a sense of involvement, to build awareness, and, at the end of the day, to do really good science. It's yet another form of collective construction.
So we've seen how collective thought can be focused to create what seem like supernatural entities, to construct alternate political realities, and even to generate scientific data. And all of this brings us to some pretty big ethical questions about what we're actually creating.
Let's go back to those thought forms for a second. The source material asks a really profound question. If one of these egregores becomes self-aware, does that make it real? I mean, do we suddenly have to treat it as a real being? And that question just gets bigger and bigger. When a political narrative takes on a life of its own, or a scientific consensus is built by a huge crowd, are we, in some weird way, creating a new kind of life?
And that is the big question we want to leave you with. If we are the creators of these things, these constructs of our collective mind, what responsibility, if any, do we have for what they become and for what they do out there in the world?